They told the widow her husband's ashes were theirs until she paid. Not the funeral, not the cremation, not the plain steel urn she had chosen because her husband hated fancy things. His ashes, the last physical piece of the man who had slept beside her for 42 years, was somewhere behind a locked door, and the man in the gray suit said it would stay there until she found another $3,870. By the next evening, that same funeral home would be taped off by police, its director in handcuffs, its basement sealed as a crime scene, and 400 bikers would be standing outside in total silence while a town learned what had really been done to its dead. But at 4:16 on a rainy Thursday afternoon, Eleanor Mercer was alone. By then, nobody outside knew the worst part. They thought they were watching a fight over money. They were really watching the first crack in a machine that had been selling grief back to the people it had already robbed. Crestwood Memorial smelled like lilies, lemon polish, and expensive quiet. Behind the reception desk, gold letters on the wall promised dignity in every farewell. Ellie stood beneath those words, with her purse clutched in both hands and her husband's death certificate folded inside a plastic sleeve. Her black coat was too thin for the weather. Her shoes were still damp from the parking lot. She had been awake since 3 that morning because grief did not respect clocks. Across the desk, Preston Vale slid the invoice toward her with 2 fingers. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "the account must be settled before we can release remains. I already paid you. You paid the initial service balance. I paid what you told me it would cost. I sold his compressor, his lift, half the tools in his shop. I'm afraid there were additional charges." "For what?" Preston tapped the page. "Custodial care, handling revision, delayed release processing." Preston gave a small, practiced sigh. Grief doesn't cancel a balance. The words did not slam into the room. They settled. They slid under the skin. Inside Ellie's purse was a bank envelope with $143. All that remained after the hospital, prescriptions, ambulance, and the black dress she had bought from a thrift store. Thomas had always hated debt. He used to pay bills early and then complain that the electric company was probably disappointed he had ruined their fun. She looked toward the frosted glass door behind Preston. Somewhere beyond it was Thomas Mercer, her Tom. The man who came home smelling like motor oil and wintergreen mints. The man who never charged a widow for labor and never let a stranded rider push a dead bike in the rain. "I just need to take him home," Ellie said. "The service is tomorrow. He asked me to take part of him to the bridge on Route 17. Then let me take him and I'll pay every month. That is not our policy." "I didn't know there were policies for holding a dead man hostage." Something flickered in Preston's eyes, not guilt, irritation. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from, because what happened to Ellie Mercer could happen in any town where grief becomes someone else's business model. And if you've ever seen someone powerful squeeze a person when they were too broken to fight back, stay with this story. Preston Vale had spent years mistaking silence for weakness, and that mistake was about to bring thunder to his front door. Preston stood and opened his office door just enough to make the conversation feel finished. "Your husband signed service authorization paperwork. These charges are valid." Tom could barely hold a pen that week, which is why planning ahead is so important. For 1 second, the room went perfectly still. Ellie thought of the night Thomas died. His fingers had moved against her palm, trying to say one last thing after words had already left him. She had leaned close enough to hear him whisper, "Don't let them make it fancy. Just get me home." Now she was 6 feet from a locked room, unable to do even that. At the reception desk, Marla Fisk pretended to arrange brochures. She had helped Ellie choose the plain urn. Now she looked up once, and there was a warning in her eyes. "Marla," he called, "check the East Chapel arrangement." "There is no East Chapel arrangement today." Ellie pulled the envelope from her purse. Her hands shook so badly the bills nearly slipped out. "I have $143. Take it, please. I can bring more next month." "Partial payment will not release the remains." Impasse. Such a clean word for a locked door. Ellie stepped around the desk, just one step toward the frosted glass. Preston moved faster and blocked her path. And he will be cared for respectfully until the matter is resolved. That was when Ellie finally broke. Not loudly. Her mouth trembled, and the tears came before she could stop them. Thomas had hated seeing her cry in front of strangers. Tears were honest things, he used to say, and not everybody deserved to witness them. Preston held out a tissue box with the stiff generosity of a man handing over a receipt. She walked past him, past the gold letters promising dignity, past a young man in a black delivery jacket standing near a vase of white roses. She did not see the patch half hidden under his jacket. She did not know he had heard every word. The rain had turned the parking lot silver. Ellie climbed into Thomas's old blue pickup and shut the door. The truck still smelled like him. Grease, cedar shavings, wintergreen gum. His work gloves were tucked into the door pocket. One glove had a burn mark across the thumb from the winter he tried to teach Caleb Briggs how to weld and nearly set his sleeve on fire. For almost a full minute, Ellie did nothing. Then she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, Tom," she whispered. "I tried." In the side mirror, Crestwood Memorial glowed behind her, warm and elegant and locked. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the small metal token she had found in Thomas's old leather jacket 3 nights earlier. On one side was a wolf's head. On the other, 5 words were engraved deep into the metal. She had thought it was some old garage joke. 20 feet away, under the narrow awning by the service entrance, the young man with the roses pulled out his phone. His name was Caleb Briggs, though most people called him Sparrow. Thomas Mercer had once found him bleeding beside a wrecked motorcycle on Route 17 and stayed until the ambulance arrived. Then he looked back at the funeral home. He had recorded Preston Vale's voice. Not all of it. Enough. Caleb had not called that number in nearly 2 years. Some names still carried weight, even when they sat untouched in a phone. Caleb swallowed. Ellie was sobbing in the truck with her husband's empty passenger seat beside her. "They're holding old Tom's ashes hostage," Caleb said. Caleb looked down at the audio file still glowing on his screen. Thomas Mercer had never known how to let a stranded man stay stranded. If somebody broke down on Route 17, Tom stopped. If a kid came into his garage short on cash and long on excuses, Tom listened. If a biker rolled in with a busted clutch, $2, and pride too damaged to ask for help, Tom would spit into a rag, wipe his hands, and say the same thing every time. Most people thought he was just being kind. Thomas Mercer had been poor enough to understand that sometimes kindness was the only thing keeping a person from disappearing completely. One winter night, Ryder Kane rolled into the garage pushing a Harley through sleet. He was younger then, not yet the hard-faced president people stepped aside for. Just a 29-year-old ex-Marine with blood on his knuckles and a bike that coughed like it wanted to die. Thomas looked him over and said, "You fighting the bike or the world?" That night, Tom fixed the carburetor, cleaned the fuel line, and noticed Ryder's hands shaking too hard to hold a wrench. He did not ask about war. He did not ask about drinking. He did not ask why a grown man looked one sentence away from falling apart. "Shop floor's dirty," Thomas said. "Make yourself useful." Caleb came in at 19, thin as wire, with a split lip, a wrecked motorcycle, and the twitchy fear of a boy who had been told his whole life that he was a problem. Thomas found him after a crash on Route 17, lying in a ditch beside a twisted bike, trying to crawl away before the police came. Caleb tried to sit up and nearly passed out. Thomas knelt in the mud beside him and held a rag against the cut above his eye, until the ambulance lights flashed through the rain. "Why are you helping me?" Caleb asked, angry because gratitude hurt more than pain. "Because somebody should have helped you before you got here." That sentence followed Caleb for the rest of his life. When he got out of the hospital, his bike was waiting at Mercer's garage. Not pretty, not perfect. Running. Ellie had left a paper bag on the seat with 2 sandwiches, a thermos of soup, and a note that said, "Bring the thermos back when life gets softer." He cried in the parking lot where nobody could see him. Except Thomas did see him, and pretended not to. That was the thing about Tom Mercer. He knew when a man needed a witness and when he needed mercy. When Thomas had his first bad spell, Ryder Kane drove them to the hospital because Ellie's hands were shaking too hard to hold the wheel. Then words Ellie stopped hearing because every new word seemed to take Thomas farther from her. The hospital bills arrived before he was even home. White envelopes, blue envelopes, final notices printed in red. Thomas tried to laugh it off from his recliner, oxygen tube under his nose. At least they can't repossess my bad knee. Ellie threw a dish towel at him and cried in the laundry room where he could not see. The garage changed after that. Less work, fewer long days, more times when Thomas sat on the stool by the bench pretending to check spark plugs while his hand trembled too badly to hold a socket. First the second lift, then the compressor, then the old red toolbox Thomas had won in a poker game in 1987 and loved more than some relatives. I was going to be buried with that box. She laughed, and for one blessed second they were young again. But sickness does not care about love. It ate the weight from his face. It stole his strength in quiet pieces. It turned a man who once pushed dead trucks across gravel into someone who needed help walking from bed to bathroom. Still, when riders came by, Thomas sat up straighter. He never wanted them to know how bad it was. One evening, 2 weeks before Thomas died, Ryder came alone. No club, no engines outside, just his truck in the driveway after dark. Ellie was washing dishes when she saw Thomas hand him something at the kitchen table. Wolf's head on one side, 5 words on the other. Ryder closed his fist around it like Thomas had put a live coal in his palm. I might not, Thomas answered. She might. Ellie stepped into the room. Both men stopped talking. Old club nonsense, Thomas said too quickly. Ryder stood, kissed Ellie on the cheek, and left without finishing his coffee. There are people in this world who remember. 8 days later, Thomas Mercer died before sunrise while rain tapped gently against the bedroom window. Ellie held his hand until it cooled. His last breath was not dramatic. It was small, almost polite, as if even death had arrived and Thomas did not want to make a fuss. The arrangements were supposed to be simple. No expensive casket, no chapel full of strangers, no polished speeches from people who only came because death made them sentimental. Then the old bridge on Route 17, where Thomas had once kissed Ellie for the first time while pretending he stopped because the truck was overheating. Preston Vale shook her hand with both of his and said, "We'll take good care of him." Ellie believed him because grief makes paperwork look like trust. Went home to a house so quiet she left the television on all night just to hear another human voice. Now Thomas was behind glass, locked away by a man who had never known him, never owed him, never heard him laugh at a motor that wouldn't turn over, never watched him give his last $20 to a stranger because the stranger's kid needed medicine. Ellie sat in the pickup outside Crestwood, the metal token pressed into her palm hard enough to leave a mark. She wiped her face and answered carefully. "My name is Caleb Briggs. I was just inside. Your husband saved my life once. I don't mean that like people say it. He found me bleeding in a ditch and stayed until help came. Then he fixed my bike and fed me when I had nothing." Ellie looked through the windshield at the funeral home. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't remember you." Rain slid down the glass in crooked lines. Ellie's fingers tightened around the phone. "Who?" For the first time all afternoon, Ellie forgot to cry. Behind her, far down the wet road, thunder rolled. Inside Crestwood Memorial, Preston stood at the front window with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the old blue pickup sit in the lot. Scenes were messy. Scenes made staff emotional. Scenes made other families ask questions. Questions, in Preston's experience, were bad for business. She looked up too quickly. "Yes, Mr. Vale?" Her husband's remains are being withheld over a balance she says she didn't know about. That is an emotional description of a contractual matter. Marla had worked at Crestwood for 11 years. She had watched Preston take over after his father retired, watched the soft carpets get replaced, the chapel prices rise, the grief packages multiply, and the invoices become harder to understand. At first, she told herself all funeral homes were like this. The old men counting folded bills with shaking fingers. The mother who asked if she could hold her baby's urn for 1 minute before paying the rest. And Preston told her company policy did not allow emotional exceptions. Almost was the word that had ruined more lives than cruelty ever could. Preston unlocked the file cabinet behind the desk. She pulled the folder from the front row. It was thicker than it should have been. Thomas Mercer had requested the simplest service: direct cremation, basic urn, death certificates, no chapel rental. Marla remembered because Ellie had apologized for choosing the plain urn, as if simplicity were shameful. Preston opened the folder and flipped through the papers. People hear the word ashes and suddenly forget obligations. Additional custodial care authorization. She had never seen that form in the Mercer file before. The signature at the bottom read Thomas A. Mercer. Marla had watched Thomas try to sign the original paperwork 2 weeks before he died. His hand had trembled so badly Ellie had to hold the clipboard steady. His T dragged downward, crooked and broken. "Mr. Vale," Marla said carefully, "I don't remember this form being present during the arrangement conference." "You aren't required to remember every document." Marla looked toward the front windows. Ellie's truck was still there. "What bothers me is the belief that death should be affordable simply because it is unavoidable." For a moment, Marla saw him clearly. Not as a businessman, not as a director, as someone who had found a way to put a price tag on helplessness. Caleb stepped back inside, carrying the vase of white roses he had never delivered. Rain darkened his jacket. His face was calm, but his eyes went straight to Marla, then to the folder on Preston's desk. Caleb lifted the roses. Delivery mix-up. Needed a signature. Caleb set the vase down. His phone was in his jacket pocket, screen dark, recording. "Marla," Preston said, still looking at Caleb, "prepare the west viewing room." As she passed Caleb, she whispered so quietly even she barely heard it. Preston waited until Marla disappeared, then stepped closer. "You were present during a private conversation." "Young man, I don't know what you think you heard, but involving yourself in funeral arrangements that do not concern you is unwise." The name landed wrong in Preston's polished room. Not Mr. Mercer, not the deceased, not case number CM-4187. Preston glanced toward the windows. Ellie's truck was pulling away now, slowly, brake lights glowing red through the rain. "Tell Mrs. Mercer," Preston said, "that if she continues making accusations, Crestwood will exercise its contractual rights regarding unclaimed remains." "It means the deceased will be handled according to policy." Preston leaned in. "If she cannot pay, she cannot dictate terms." In his pocket, the phone kept recording. Caleb walked into the rain. By the time he reached his bike, the audio file had already been sent. To a group chat Caleb had not used in months because he still felt too young, too new, too unfinished to belong among people who had survived harder things than him. Preston Vale just threatened to move old Tom's ashes if Ellie doesn't pay. Nobody calls her again. Nobody goes in alone. I'm handling it. Caleb sat on his bike, rain dripping from his helmet onto the tank. Attorney, veteran, former Iron Saint, a man who wore suits now but still had the club tattooed beneath his left sleeve. For almost 30 seconds, no one answered. Then Ryder sent 6 words that made Caleb's hands go cold. Inside Crestwood, Preston locked the Mercer folder in his office safe. The widow was poor. The young biker was emotional. The staff would stay quiet because staff always stayed quiet when rent was due. He straightened his tie, checked his reflection in the dark window, and returned to the front desk as if nothing in the world had shifted. But in a house 30 miles away, Ryder Kane stood before a wall of old photographs. In one of them, Thomas Mercer stood beside 10 younger riders in front of his garage, holding a coffee mug and scowling because someone had made him pose. Then he opened a locked drawer and took out a weathered leather vest, only a small stitched name inside the collar. Ellie drove home in the rain with one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around the metal token in her lap. Every red light looked like Crestwood's sign. Every passing mile pulled her farther from Thomas, and that felt wrong in a way her body understood before her mind did. A wife did not leave her husband behind, not in a funeral home, because a man in a suit had found a polite way to say poor. Her phone rang when she turned onto County Road 12. She almost let it go. She had no strength left for strangers, no room left for another bill, another condolence, another voice telling her what she should have done sooner. The voice was older than Caleb's, low, gravelly, controlled. The truck drifted toward the shoulder. Ellie corrected it with a sharp breath. She had heard that name. Not often. Thomas almost never talked about people's worst days, and Ryder Kane sounded like a man who had owned plenty of them. But she had heard the garage go quiet when his bike pulled in. She had watched Thomas treat him, not with fear, but with the heavy respect men give each other when too much history is buried under ordinary words. The answer came too quickly, too certainly. Ellie turned into her driveway. The little white house sat dark at the end of it, rain dripping from the porch roof. Thomas had fixed that gutter 3 times and cursed it every spring. 2 weeks before he passed, Tom handed me something, a vest, some papers, a list of names. He said if you ever got cornered and were too proud to call, I was supposed to know anyway. He also said you'd try to refuse help. For the first time, Ryder almost laughed. It came out like breath over stone. Mrs. Mercer, Preston Vale threatened to move your husband's ashes. No, you heard it as a possibility. I heard him say it like a man who's done it before. For 1 second, she saw Thomas not as he had been in the hospital, thin and fading, but as he had been in the garage 20 years earlier, standing under the hood of a truck with a wrench in his hand and a pencil behind his ear. Alive, solid, impossible to move unless he wanted to be moved. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "You can eat. You can sleep if you can. You cannot sign anything. You cannot answer any calls from Crestwood. And tomorrow morning, you can come back." Then, far away through the phone, she heard another voice in the background, a man asking, "How many we got?" Another answering, "Still counting." "Ryder," she said, fear rising. "What are you doing?" The house looked empty in front of her. The porch light had burned out 2 nights before, and she had not been able to make herself change it because Thomas always changed the porch light. It was such a small thing, a bulb, a ladder, 5 minutes of work. But grief had a way of turning 5 minutes into a mountain. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "Your husband pulled me out of a bottle before it became a grave. He gave Diesel a job when nobody would hire a felon. He sat with Rosa in an emergency waiting room when her son overdosed. He fixed Maven's trach for free after chemo took half the strength from his body. He let Caleb believe he was worth saving before Caleb believed it himself." "We did not forget him," Ryder said, "and we did not forget you." For the first time since Thomas died, Ellie made a sound that was almost a sob and almost relief. Inside the house, the kitchen clock was still ticking. She could see it through the window above the sink. Thomas had bought that clock at a yard sale because it had a rooster painted on it, and he thought ugly things deserved homes too. That scared her more than any threat would have. "We are not coming to hurt anyone," Ryder said. "No broken windows, no threats, no excuse for Vale. We come calm. We bring a lawyer, a pastor, 2 retired officers, and every person who can say Thomas Mercer was not an unpaid account in a folder." For 42 years, that seat had belonged to Thomas. His coffee thermos in the cup holder, his old cap on the dash, his hand resting palm up on long drives because he knew she would eventually reach for it. But for the first time, it did not feel abandoned. Because Tom didn't like making people feel owed. Then she cried again, but differently. Not the helpless crying from Crestwood. This was grief finding air. Ryder waited. He did not fill the silence. Finally, Ellie wiped her face with her sleeve. Ellie sat in the truck until the windows fogged. Then she got out, walked through the rain, and stopped at the porch. For a moment, she almost left it that way. Then she saw Thomas in her mind, standing at the bottom of the ladder with that crooked grin. Darkness is free. Light costs effort. She dragged the ladder from the hallway closet. It took 8 minutes because her hands shook and her knee hurt, but she changed the porch light herself. When it flickered on, warm and yellow against the rain, Ellie stood beneath it holding the dead bulb like a tiny, defeated thing. Across town, Ryder Kane stood in the center of the Iron Saints clubhouse while phones buzzed on every table. The place had once been a feed warehouse. Now it smelled of leather, coffee, engine oil, and rain drying on denim. Men and women filled the room in half-dressed riding gear, some still in work boots, some in uniforms from jobs they had left mid-shift. 86 confirmed from us and the Wolves. Add 42 from Devil's Canyon, Rosa said, phone against her ear. Their president says no colors conflict. They'll ride neutral if needed. Maven sat near the wall, cane between his knees, reading messages through thick glasses. Big Tommy raised his hand. Teachers' Union says they can't officially support anything involving bikers, but I've got 12 staff members asking if they can come in cars. Caleb stood near the door, soaked through, eyes red with anger. He was trying to keep useful. Crestwood has cameras. Preston will say we threatened him. Then we give him nothing but truth to lie about. Ryder picked up Thomas's vest from the table. Plain leather, no patch, no rank, no club, only years of oil darkened into the seams. Old Tom never wore our colors, Ryder said. He never wanted them, said he didn't need a patch to know who his people were. Rosa wiped one eye with the heel of her hand and pretended she had not. Tomorrow, every person who rides does it under one rule: no violence, no drinking, no threats, no stupid pride. We park clean, we speak calm, we record everything. We protect Mrs. Mercer's dignity before we protect our own. Then the whole town watches him refuse. Diesel looked at the newest count and lifted his head. The number at the bottom was circled twice. Then Caleb's phone lit up with a message from a number he did not know. His first thought was that it had to be a prank. His second thought was that nobody outside Crestwood should have known enough to send it. Every conversation in the clubhouse died. Ryder crossed the room and read the message. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes hardened. Could be a trap, Maven said. If I wanted 400 riders to look like a mob, I'd send that. Caleb's voice cracked. If they move him tonight, then why are we standing here counting bikes? Caleb knew he had gone too far the moment the words left his mouth. Men like Ryder Kane did not need to raise their voices to make silence dangerous. You think I don't want to kick that door in? You think I don't want to drag Preston Vale by his perfect tie into that back room and make him point? That's exactly what he needs. One broken lock, one shoved employee, one scared receptionist saying bikers stormed a funeral home. Then tomorrow isn't about Ellie Mercer, it's about us. Old Tom does not get buried under our pride. Anger is fuel, she said, not steering. Across the clubhouse, phones kept lighting up. The message about Thomas became a living thing, moving through kitchens, garages, firehouses, hospital break rooms, and dark bedrooms where people had been trying to sleep before an old debt woke them. By midnight, the number was no longer just bikers. It was riders, veterans, nurses, mechanics, teachers, truck drivers, 2 church deacons, 1 retired judge, and a local reporter named Annie Vale, who had the unfortunate honor of sharing a last name with Preston, but no relation and no affection. She answered Ryder's call on the 4th ring. Thomas Mercer's widow is being denied his ashes over surprise fees. We have audio, possibly forged paperwork, possibly other families. When he finished, Annie was no longer tired. She speaks if she wants, not because we need a headline. Caleb listened near the door, seeing the shape of Thomas's life grow wider with every story. He had thought old Tom saved him once. Now he was realizing Thomas had been saving people quietly for decades, 1 repair, 1 sandwich, 1 night of shelter at a time. At 1:37 a.m., Marcus Bell arrived in a dark suit under a raincoat, carrying a leather briefcase. His hair was cut clean, his shoes polished, but when he rolled up his sleeve to take coffee from Rosa, the old Iron Saints tattoo showed beneath the cuff. "Tell me we're not doing anything stupid," Marcus said. Marcus listened to the recordings. Preston's voice filled the clubhouse. Your husband should have planned better. If she cannot pay, she cannot dictate terms. That man is either very confident or very used to no one challenging him. Marcus opened his briefcase and laid papers across the table. Tomorrow, Mrs. Mercer does not enter alone. I request itemized accounting, signed authorizations, chain of custody records, and immediate release pending fee dispute. Maven tapped his cane. What about the blocked message? Could be staff, could be bait. Either way, we do not accuse without proof. Boring wins lawsuits, calm wins custody disputes. Paper wins wars people think are about muscle. At 2:15 a.m., Ryder sent final instructions to every confirmed rider. Park in 2 lines, no revving, no weapons visible, no alcohol, no threats, no touching staff, no entering unless asked. Record public interactions only. Mrs. Mercer leads, we follow. Across Briar Falls and beyond, garage doors lifted in the dark. Engines coughed awake. Headlights cut across driveways. Coffee steamed in travel mugs. Leather jackets came off hooks. Flags were folded and strapped down. Old knees protested. Young hands trembled. Nobody turned back. Ellie woke at 5:12 after less than an hour of sleep. For one confused second, she reached across the bed for Thomas. The funeral home, the invoice, Ryder's call, the question still standing in the dark like a stranger at the foot of the bed. Would they let her bring Thomas home, or would Preston make him vanish behind another policy? On the chair beside the closet was the dress she planned to wear to Thomas's service. Simple black, too thin for the weather. Beside it sat his old denim shirt, the one she had not been able to wash because the collar still held the faint smell of him. At 7:41, a knock sounded at the front door. Ellie opened it and found Ryder Kane on her porch with his helmet under one arm. Behind him, parked along her little road as far as she could see, were motorcycles. Enough to make the morning feel different. Inside the collar, stitched in fading thread, was Thomas's name. Then another engine rolled into the street. Ellie did not understand the size of what was happening until Ryder stepped aside. The road in front of her little house was alive. Motorcycles lined the shoulder in quiet formation, headlights glowing in the gray morning. Men and women sat on them without speaking, rainwater still shining on chrome and leather. Some wore club vests, some wore work jackets, some had flags folded across their saddlebags. Some looked young enough to be Thomas's grandchildren. Others looked old enough to have known him before his hands started shaking. Every one of them looked at Ellie as if she mattered. She held Thomas's vest against her chest. Ryder stood at the bottom of the porch steps. You're not letting them. They chose. More bikes turned onto the road, slow and respectful. No engine revving, no show, just arrival. By the time they stopped, Ellie could hardly stand. We need to go while we still own the morning, he said. I don't want children looking out windows thinking something terrible is happening. Something terrible already happened. We're just making sure it doesn't stay quiet. That answer followed Ellie all the way to Crestwood. At 8:19, Preston Vale stood in his office with the Mercer folder open on his desk and a headache forming behind his eyes. The blocked number that had texted Caleb was not his, but he knew someone had betrayed him. Staff, most likely. Marla, almost certainly. She had always been too soft for this profession, too sentimental, too interested in the people after they became accounts. She entered with a face that told him she had also not slept. Preston turned the Mercer folder toward her. I need you to witness Mrs. Mercer's signature when she arrives. What signature? Acknowledgement of delayed release due to unpaid balance. The document on the desk was new, 1 page, clean language, dangerous language. I understand that failure to resolve outstanding custodial charges may result in transfer, consolidation, or lawful disposition of remains according to Crestwood Memorial policy. Transfer, consolidation, or disposition. For ashes? For unclaimed remains. They're not unclaimed. His wife came yesterday. Marla held his gaze longer than she ever had. Something in the way she said it made Preston go still. He walked around the desk, voice dropping. "You have a mortgage, a sister in assisted living, a son who left community college twice. Do not mistake a difficult morning for moral courage." There it was, the real Preston. Not the polished director, the man underneath, counting weakness like money. "You will witness the signature," he said, "or you will collect your final check." Through the lobby windows, she saw the first motorcycles turning into the street. A line of them, slow and disciplined, headlights glowing through the morning mist. The bell chimed again as Caleb Briggs entered first. He wore no helmet now. His hair was damp. His hands were empty. Behind him came Marcus Bell in a dark suit with a briefcase. Then Reverend Cole in his black coat. Then Rosa. Then Diesel. Then Ryder Kane walking beside Ellie Mercer. For the first time since Marla had known him, Preston Vale looked uncertain. He smoothed his tie, stepped into the lobby, and smiled. "Mrs. Mercer, I was hoping we could resolve this privately." Ellie looked smaller than everyone around her, but she did not lower her eyes. "Marcus Bell, I represent Mrs. Mercer for the purpose of this dispute." "There is no dispute. There is an unpaid balance." "Then you won't mind providing itemized accounting, signed authorizations, chain of custody documentation for Mr. Mercer's remains, and immediate confirmation that the remains have not been moved since yesterday afternoon." Across the street, people had begun stepping out of the bakery, the pharmacy, the hardware store. A police cruiser rolled slowly to the curb, then another. Ryder stayed beside Ellie, hands visible, face calm. Preston saw the cameras next, phones held at chest level, a news camera across the sidewalk. Annie Vale under an umbrella, watching like a woman who had smelled smoke and found the locked door. "Mrs. Mercer, I understand your grief, but bringing a motorcycle gang to a funeral home is not going to change contractual reality." Ellie's fingers curled once against Thomas's vest. "Good, then contractual reality should be easy to document." Marla stood behind the desk, heart pounding in her throat. She looked at Ellie, then at the folder in Preston's hand, then at the hallway behind them, where the frosted glass door led to the room that was supposed to hold Thomas Mercer. "Mr. Vale," Marcus said, opening his briefcase, "before we discuss money, please produce Mr. Mercer's remains." Preston's hand tightened around the folder. Outside, the sound of engines kept growing. The sound outside Crestwood did not explode. He had expected noise. Chaos, men revving engines, leather vests in the lobby, shouted threats he could use later in a police statement. Instead, the riders parked like they had rehearsed it. No one crossed the property line except the few standing beside Ellie. Preston looked through the window and saw the street filling from both directions. Motorcycles rolled in slowly. Behind them came pickups, vans, old sedans, a church minibus, even a retired fire engine with faded lettering. People came on foot, too. The baker stood in her doorway with flour on her apron. The pharmacist stepped outside and locked his door behind him. Two teenagers raised their phones from the corner. A mail carrier stopped halfway down the block. Briar Falls was waking up to a funeral home surrounded by silence. "Mr. Vale," Marcus said again, "please produce Mr. Mercer's remains. I'm happy to discuss release procedures after the balance is satisfied." Her voice had been soft, but it cut through the room because it was the first time she had spoken without asking permission. She stood in Thomas's vest, one hand tucked into the pocket where the metal token rested against her fingers. "No more procedures, no more new papers, no more words I don't understand until after I sign them. I came for my husband." "Mrs. Mercer, I appreciate that this is emotional for you." Marcus lifted a hand without looking at him. That small gesture told Preston something he did not like. These people had discipline, and Marcus Bell had authority without volume. "Do not call her emotional as if that answers a legal question," Marcus said. "The sidewalk is public, the recordings are lawful. My client is inside by appointment regarding her husband's remains. The officers outside are welcome to enter as witnesses." Chief Daniel Harlan stepped in first. He was 60, broad through the shoulders, with the tired face of a man who had spent 30 years learning that small towns could hide big sins. Behind him came Officer Patel and Officer Green. Both looked at the lobby, the riders, the cameras, then at Preston. "Chief, I'm glad you're here. As you can see, we have a disruption. There are hundreds of bikers outside my funeral home." Harlan looked at Marla. "You feel intimidated, Marla?" Preston turned just enough for only Marla to see his expression. Marla's fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. For 11 years, she had chosen, almost. Outside, another engine shut off, then another. The silence deepened. Marla looked past Preston at Ellie Mercer, a widow wearing a dead man's vest because it was the closest thing she had to armor. A small sound moved through the lobby, not a gasp, more like the room taking its first honest breath. "Chief, we are requesting documentation that Mr. Mercer's remains are currently on site and have not been transferred, altered, consolidated, or otherwise moved." Preston spoke too quickly. "Legal terminology, nothing more." "Maybe, so produce the urn and keep it civil." Outside, a woman's voice rose from the sidewalk. A woman in a red coat stood at the curb, phone in hand, tears already running down her face. Beside her was a biker with a gray beard and both hands clenched at his sides. Preston's expression changed for half a second. The woman stepped closer but stayed outside. "You told me they were delayed. You told me the paperwork wasn't finished. You charged us storage fees after we paid in full." "No," Marcus said, "you did. We just invited the people who heard the same story." Ellie stared through the glass. She had thought her pain was private, singular, a cruel thing that happened to her because she was tired and poor and too trusting. Other people who had walked out of this building ashamed when they should have been comforted. So did the question hanging over the entire street. If Preston had done it to them too, how many goodbyes were locked behind his doors? Preston's voice snapped. "Do not answer that." Chief Harlan turned slowly. "Why shouldn't she answer?" Preston recovered fast. "Employees are not authorized to disclose custodial details without proper review." Marcus smiled without humor. "Good. Review it now." Harlan looked toward the frosted glass hallway. Ryder watched him the way he might watch a bad patch of road at night. "Preston," the chief said, "open the back." "No. Outrageous is a widow standing in your lobby, asking if her husband's ashes are in the building, and you acting like it's a trade secret." Then, hundreds of hands, steady and low, a sound like rain on a metal roof. She knew the back room key. It had a green tag. Preston had taken the smaller ring from his private pocket, the one staff never touched. But once truth escaped, it did not return politely. "The front holding room is for families. Labeled urns, temporary storage. The second room is behind the preparation hall. Staff aren't allowed in without Mr. Vale." Marcus's voice dropped. "What is in the second room?" For the first time, he looked afraid of her. "I don't know everything," she said, "but I know Mr. Mercer's file was marked special hold." Ellie felt the words enter her body like cold water. Thomas, who hated fuss. Thomas, who wanted plain. Thomas, who had said, "Just get me home." Ryder's hand flexed once at his side, then stilled. "I will not allow a search of licensed funeral premises without a warrant." Marcus closed his briefcase with a soft click, until Marcus turned toward Annie outside. Marcus faced the glass doors, speaking clearly. "Crestwood Memorial has refused to confirm the location of Thomas Mercer's remains after demanding additional payment from his widow. A staff member has stated there is a second restricted storage room and a special hold on the Mercer file. Multiple families outside have raised similar complaints. We are formally requesting law enforcement preserve all records and prevent removal of any remains from the property pending legal review." Outside, the crowd went completely silent again. That silence frightened Preston more than applause. Preston's eyes flicked toward the hallway. So did Caleb, standing near the lobby door. Caleb moved to the glass and looked toward the narrow driveway beside the building. A white service van sat there with its back doors closed. Through the window, beyond the line of parked motorcycles, she saw exhaust curling from the van behind Crestwood. And in the driver's seat, a young employee stared forward with both hands on the wheel, looking like a man waiting for permission to disappear. That was the detail Caleb could not stop seeing. Not the white paint, not the funeral home logo printed neatly on the side. The engine. Someone had started it before anyone asked to open the storage rooms. "Chief," Caleb said, "that van's about to move." Ryder looked at the driver. Young guy, maybe 25, pale face, shoulders stiff, hands locked at 10 and 2 like he was taking a driving test in hell.
"That man doesn't look like he's moving supplies," Ryder said.
Officer Patel was already heading for the side door. Preston stepped forward. "You have no authority to search company property without—" "I have authority to ask why your employee is sitting in a running van after you refuse to confirm the location of human remains." Outside, 400 people turned their heads almost as one as Patel moved down the side driveway toward the van. No one shouted. No one blocked the road. No one touched the vehicle. For half a second, the van lurched forward. But before the driver could turn the wheel, 3 riders on the sidewalk stepped back in perfect unison, opening a clear path and raising their hands. Officer Patel reached the window and knocked twice. Even from inside the lobby, Ellie could see his lips moving fast. "Derek Shaw," Marla answered. "He started 6 months ago, removals and storage transfers." The words sounded harmless until grief touched them.
Chief Harlan opened the lobby door and called out, "Patel?" "He says Mr. Vale told him to wait for a call." Preston lifted his chin. "I manage my employees without police supervision." Preston closed his eyes once, like a man hearing a rope tighten. Marla stepped from behind the desk. Her hands were shaking, but she did not stop. "I saw boxes being loaded before we opened. Not document boxes, transfer boxes. Gray cremation transport boxes, at least 5. Ryder saw rage ripple through the crowd. He stepped onto the sidewalk and raised his right hand. Diesel looked like every muscle in his body had turned to stone. Rose's jaw was clenched so tight it hurt to look at her. "We do this clean, for Tom, for every family here. Nobody gives him a way out." Inside, Ellie watched him and understood why Thomas had trusted that man. Not because Ryder was dangerous, because he knew exactly how dangerous he could be and chose not to spend it carelessly. Chief Harlan walked outside. "Derek, step out." Preston's eyes flashed. "You are making a mistake." "No, Preston. I think we finally found yours." Derek stepped out of the van with both hands visible. "I didn't know," he said before anyone asked. "I swear I didn't know what was in them at first." Preston barked, "Derek, do not say another word." Derek looked at him through the glass, and something broke in his face. "You said they were abandoned. You said families didn't want them." Rosa moved beside her instantly, one hand hovering near Ellie's elbow. "There are 6 boxes in back. He told me to drive them to the annex on Mill Road if the bikers showed up. It's an old storage unit behind Vale Family Properties. I processed invoices. I thought it held furniture, old chapel chairs, seasonal displays." Derek shook his head. "Not just furniture." For one last second, the old fear almost won. Then Derek reached into his pocket, pulled out the keys, and opened the rear doors. The first thing Ellie saw was not Thomas's urn. Small white labels taped to gray transport boxes. A sound moved through the crowd, low and wounded. The woman in red collapsed against the biker beside her. "That's my mother," she whispered. "He told me she was still being processed." A man near the bakery bent forward like he had been punched. "Mrs. Mercer," Marcus said gently, "you don't have to look." Derek moved 2 boxes aside with shaking hands. Behind them was another gray container, slightly smaller, with a label folded at one corner. The street, cameras, riders, Preston, the funeral home, all of it fell away until there was only Ellie and the box holding what was left of the man who had fixed everyone else's broken things. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was him. I didn't know any of them had families asking." He stood inside the lobby, face white, tie perfect, eyes calculating even now. Preston's voice cut through from the doorway. "If you say one more word, Marla, I will sue you for breach of confidentiality.
and destroy whatever life you think you still have. The fact that he made it while standing 10 feet from stolen ashes. Marla walked to the reception desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a thick blue folder. Ryder moved faster, but stopped himself before touching him. "Preston Vale," he said, stepping between them. "Do not move." Marla came outside with the folder pressed to her chest. "I copied everything. 6 months ago. I was scared. I kept telling myself I needed proof before I did anything." Inside were invoices, duplicate ledgers, storage unit receipts, notes marked "hold until payment." Families flagged as vulnerable, elderly, low income, no local relatives, veteran spouse. Near the back was one page clipped separately. Mercer, Thomas A. Special hold. Do not release without director approval. My husband's hand trembled the last month of his life. He couldn't sign a birthday card without stopping twice. Before he could speak, Annie Vale's camera light turned red, and the whole town watched him try to explain why a dead man had learned to write better after dying. The red light changed the temperature of the street. Until that moment, Preston had been speaking to people he believed he could manage. A widow, a staff member, a young driver, a small-town police chief who had known his family for years. But a camera did not care about his father's reputation. It did not care about framed licenses, polished lobby, or a voice trained for sympathy. It simply held still and waited for the truth to make a sound. Annie stepped forward under her umbrella. "Mr. Vale, is that your signature on the authorization form?" Preston looked at her as if she had spat on the floor. The word came out quiet, but it traveled. Ellie stood beside the open van with Thomas's vest hanging from her shoulders and Thomas's ashes finally within reach, though still not in her hands. "You made it public the minute you decided my husband could be held until I paid." Marcus held up the forged document, careful not to touch the signature area. "Chief, this needs preservation. Original file, digital scan history, printer logs, and every document connected to this special hold." Preston laughed once, but there was no confidence in it. "Printer logs. You think this is a crime drama?" "No, I think this is elder exploitation, potential fraud, unlawful retention of cremated remains, document falsification, and possibly theft. But your attorney will choose prettier words. Secure the office. Nobody touches the files." Preston stepped forward. "You cannot seize my records without a warrant." "We're not seizing yet," Harlan said. "We're preserving a scene until a judge tells me how much trouble you're in." That was the first moment Preston truly understood the morning had left his control. The paper was where men like Preston lived. Contracts, fees, clauses, signatures, small print, words arranged like locks. Ellie turned toward the gray box marked Thomas Arthur Mercer. The question broke something in the crowd. Several riders lowered their heads. The woman in red pressed her face into her hands. Caleb looked away because he could not stand the softness in Ellie's voice after everything done to her. Marcus nodded. "Document the label, document the chain, then release to next of kin. There is no lawful reason to keep him in that van." Preston snapped. "There is an outstanding balance." For a second, every rider on that street seemed to breathe in at the same time. "No, there is an outstanding shame, and it belongs to you." Marla began to cry. Not loudly, a hard, exhausted breaking. "I'm sorry," she said to Ellie. "I should have told someone sooner." Marla expected anger. She deserved it. She had watched too much, signed too much, stayed too long. But Ellie only asked, "Did you know where he was?" "No, not until yesterday. Not until I saw the transfer note. I thought the holds were paperwork delays at first. Then I thought if I collected enough proof, I could stop it clean. But every week there was another family, and I kept telling myself, next time." Ellie's face softened in the saddest way. Next time is how people like him survive. From the crowd, an older man stepped forward. He wore no leather, only a brown coat and a VFW cap. He held a folded invoice. "My wife died last November. Crestwood told me there were county delays, then storage charges, then certification charges. I paid twice, still never got her. The old man looked at him with hollow eyes. Her name was June Porter. You told me if I loved her, I'd find the money. My son was 23. You told me the same thing. My father's flag disappeared from his service. You charged me for a chapel we never used. You said my mother's urn was delayed because of state processing. They came like stones placed on a grave, heavy, specific, impossible to brush away. Ryder watched Ellie while they spoke. She listened to every person, even while her own husband's ashes sat 3 feet away in a transport box. Even wounded, she made room for someone else's pain. Maybe that was why he loved her for 42 years. Derek stood near the van with his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. I drove boxes to Mill Road twice, he said suddenly. March and April, maybe before. Mr. Vale said they were abandoned remains and old records. He said the families didn't care. Derek kept talking now because fear could not stop the truth fast enough. There are shelves in the unit, labels, files. Some boxes don't have names, just numbers. Need units at Vale Family Properties Storage on Mill Road. Secure location. Possible human remains. Nobody enters until I get there. He placed himself slightly in front of the riders and said to the line behind him, "Hold." 400 people stood still, while every instinct in them wanted movement. That's what respect sounds like when it's angry. Marcus moved closer to Annie's camera and spoke clearly. For every family watching this, if Crestwood Memorial has delayed, withheld, transferred, or charged unexplained fees for your loved one's remains, contact my office. Do not confront them alone. Do not sign new documents. Preserve every invoice, text, voicemail, and receipt. Careful, Marcus said. The camera is excellent. Chief Harlan nodded to Officer Green, who carefully lifted Thomas's transport box from the van and carried it to a folding table someone had brought from the church minibus. Marcus documented the label. Harlan documented the seal. Marla confirmed the case number from the file. Inside was the plain metal urn Ellie had chosen. Not brass, not marble, not polished walnut. There was a small scratch near the bottom from the day Ellie had touched it in the arrangement room and apologized to Preston for choosing something simple. At the time, Preston had said, "Many families upgrade later." Officer Green placed the urn into them gently, as if handing over a sleeping child. The last weeks in the hospital. The garage. The bridge. The coffee cup with a crack in the handle. The way he hummed when fixing engines. The warm spot his body left in bed. 42 years of being known by one person completely. Then Ryder removed his helmet from under his arm and held it against his chest. Ellie whispered something no camera could hear. Preston watched from the doorway, and for the first time all morning, he looked small. As Marcus began gathering documents, Marla's phone buzzed. "You opened the wrong van. Check the basement freezer." Ryder looked at Crestwood's front doors, and this time, even Chief Harlan went pale. The message seemed too horrible to belong to a morning already full of horror. Preston stepped backward toward the lobby doors. "This is absurd. Anonymous texts are not evidence." Marcus looked at him. "Then you won't mind us checking. There is no basement freezer accessible to the public." Chief Harlan turned slowly. "Nobody said public." Preston's face hardened. "The lower level is for preparation and refrigeration. Licensed personnel only. Health regulations." "Good," Harlan said. "Then you know how serious this is." "Did Tom go down there?" Ellie asked Marla. Marla looked devastated. "I don't know." "I know, but Preston stopped letting staff handle certain cases last year. He said it was liability. There's an old walk-in downstairs, behind the prep room. He told me not to open it unless he was with me." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "You've been inside?" Derek looked at the crowd, then at the boxes in the van, then at Ellie with Thomas's urn. Numbers, tags on shelves, bags. Temporary containers. I didn't ask because I needed the job. That sentence had weight because too many people recognized it. How many cruel things survive on that one excuse? Preston pointed at him. "You are fired." Derek almost laughed. It came out broken. Marcus turned to Harlan. "You have multiple witnesses, potential forged documents, concealed remains in a running vehicle, a staff member with copied records, and an anonymous warning about additional remains on site." Harlan was already reaching for his radio. "Patel, Green, secure all exits. Nobody leaves. County investigators now. Notify the coroner." Preston's eyes flashed. "You do not have a warrant." "No," Harlan said. "I have probable cause that human remains may be improperly stored, moved, or concealed inside this building. If you want to fight me after I make sure nobody's mother is hidden in your basement." Ryder stepped toward the riders before it could build. "Everybody stays outside. No exceptions." Diesel looked like he hated the order, but nodded. Rosa moved closer to Ellie. "You don't have to go in. If there are other families' loved ones down there, I can't stand out here pretending mine is the only one who matters. Tom would tell you to stay in the sunlight. Tom married me because I never listened the first time." Marcus, Harlan, Officer Patel, Marla, Derek, Ryder, Rosa, and Ellie entered the funeral home. Preston tried to follow, but Harlan stopped him in the lobby. "You're staying where Green can see you." "Then you should have taken better care of what was inside it." Just for a heartbeat, hatred showed through. Ellie saw it and understood that Preston Vale was not ashamed of what they might find. He was angry they were finding it. Marla led them down the hall past the frosted glass room, past the chapel doors, past framed memorial quotes about peace and eternal rest. The hallway narrowed near the back. Carpet ended. Tile began. The air changed from lilies and polish to bleach and cold metal. The basement stairs were behind a beige door marked Staff Only. Marla took a keyring from her pocket, but her hands shook so badly she dropped it. The keys hit the tile with a sharp, metallic clatter. "No, I should have opened this door months ago." The kind that lived in machines built to preserve things people were not ready to bury. The stairs creaked under them. One fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering as if electricity did not want to stay down there. Ellie kept Thomas's urn pressed to her body with both arms. At the bottom, the preparation room waited behind a half-open door. Stainless steel counters, white cabinets, sealed supplies, clean enough to look innocent. Beyond it, at the far wall, was another door. Marcus turned toward the stairs. "Then we ask him." "No," Harlan said. "We don't give him time to remember anything convenient." Officer Patel radioed for bolt cutters from the cruiser. Those 5 minutes felt longer than the whole morning. A steady vibration that crawled into Ellie's bones. She imagined Thomas somewhere inside that cold. Then she looked down at the urn, and fear opened beneath her. What if Preston had lied even about that? What if the weight in her arms was just another trick sold to a widow because grief cannot tell ash from ash? Officer Green arrived with bolt cutters. Patel positioned them around the lock. The sound echoed through the basement like a gunshot. Harlan pulled the lock away and opened the freezer door. Metal shelves packed with sealed containers, body bags, labeled boxes, and plastic bins marked with case numbers. Some labels were printed, some handwritten. Some had names. Some had only dates. Derek backed into the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, both hands in his hair. Chief Harlan stepped inside slowly, camera held up, documenting everything. "Do not touch anything," Marcus said quietly. The name hit the room like a thrown stone. The woman in red outside had said that name. Preston had told her the ashes were delayed, but June Porter had never been cremated. Another family waiting for ashes that had never existed. Marcus looked at the shelves, face pale with controlled fury. This isn't just withholding remains. He may have been charging for cremations he never completed. Marla shook her head. "No, some were cremated. I processed certificates." Marcus looked at her. "Did you see the cremations?" A shelf near the back, half hidden behind 2 plastic bins. On it were personal effects bags, watches, rings, glasses, folded flags, dentures in labeled cups, cross necklaces, wedding bands taped inside envelopes. Lives stripped down to what could fit in plastic. And there, in a clear bag with a case label attached, was a small brass key on a red string. Inside the bag was the key Thomas had worn around his neck for 30 years. The red string was faded from sweat and oil. Ellie had tied that string herself after Thomas lost the key twice in 1 week. Mercer, Thomas A. Personal effects. Hold. Ellie looked down at the urn in her arms. Preston told me Tom had no personal effects when he was transferred. On the same shelf, under the personal effects tray, was a black binder. Marcus opened it carefully with gloved hands Patel provided. His face went hard in a way Ryder had never seen. "Chief," he said, "we need the State Attorney General." Marcus pointed to the bottom of the page. Mercer, Thomas A. Balance outstanding. Cremation status, pending. Family release, substitute held. Because every sound became too far away to matter. Any other person might have let it fall, might have screamed, might have shattered under the weight of what those words meant. But Ellie Mercer simply stood in the basement freezer of Crestwood Memorial, holding a container that was supposed to be her husband, and went so still it frightened every person in the room. Marcus did not answer right away. He was a lawyer, a soldier once, a man trained to choose words carefully when words could become weapons. But there was no gentle legal phrase for this. The sound that came out of Ellie was not loud, small, wounded, almost confused, like her mind had reached for grief and found something beneath it with teeth. She placed the urn on the nearest metal table with both hands, carefully, as if whatever was inside had also been wronged and did not deserve to be thrown. "I carried that," she said. "I held it against my heart." Ryder moved toward her, but she lifted one hand. At least 12 marked that way in this binder. Derek rocked on the floor. "I didn't know. I didn't know." "Derek, look at me. Did Preston ever tell you what substitute meant?" He said sometimes families needed symbolic containers while paperwork caught up. He said everything was legal if the forms were clean. If the forms were clean because he made them clean. Upstairs, the crowd outside Crestwood was beginning to understand that something worse had been found. The sound came through the floor as a dull human murmur, hundreds of voices trying not to become thunder. "I need county coroner on scene now, state police, attorney general's office, possible improper retention and fraudulent disposition of human remains." Preston's voice came from the stairwell before anyone saw him. "You have no idea what you're looking at." He stood halfway down the stairs with Officer Green behind him, one hand on Preston's arm. His perfect suit looked obscene among the cold shelves and labeled containers. Harlan turned. "I told you to stay upstairs. I am the licensed funeral director responsible for this facility." "No," Marcus said. "You're the suspect responsible for this facility." "Do you really think you people understand mortuary operations? Do you think every grieving widow gets to decide how logistics work?" Ryder moved with her, but again she stopped him with a hand. Preston looked at the urn on the table, then at her. "Mrs. Mercer, I understand how this appears. Your husband's case required additional processing due to incomplete payment status." Preston's eyes flicked toward the black binder. "It is an internal tracking document, easily misinterpreted." For the first time, Preston's smoothness failed him. "It refers to temporary release options." Preston searched for a person weak enough to become useful. Mr. Shaw misunderstood instructions and mishandled documentation. Maybe because Preston had finally pointed at him in front of everyone. Maybe because fear of losing a job had been replaced by the horror of what that job helped hide. "You don't put this on me. You told me not to open sealed boxes. You told me families abandon them. You told me poor people make emotional accusations because they want free services." Preston snapped. "You are a disgruntled employee trying to save yourself." Derek reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "It's a transfer sheet from last week. He told me to burn it. I didn't." Marla shook her head. "We don't do cremations here." "No," Marcus said, "but this lists several bodies to be transferred to an outside facility under one authorization code." Not much. Just a shift backward toward the stairs. Officer Green tightened his grip, but Preston twisted suddenly, sharper than anyone expected, yanking free and lunging upward. Officer Green caught Preston at the second step and slammed him against the wall, hard enough to rattle the handrail. "You don't understand," he shouted. "Do you know what it costs to keep these people? Refrigeration, paperwork, staff, transport. Families vanish. They cry poor. They beg. They promise payment. Then they leave bodies behind and expect dignity for free. Not an accident. Not paperwork. Contempt." "You charged me for a cremation," Ellie said. Preston panted, hair out of place, face red. "You paid what you could afford. That is not the same thing." From the lobby out into the street, where Annie Vale's camera was still recording sound. "Preston Vale, you're under arrest pending investigation for fraud, falsification of records, and unlawful handling of human remains. More charges will follow. You cannot arrest me because a mob pressured you. No, I'm arresting you because you confessed loud enough for half the town to hear." Upstairs, when Preston was brought through the lobby, the riders did not shout. That seemed to bother him more than rage would have. The baker, the pharmacist, the mail carrier, the teenagers, the families with folders in their hands. And Ellie watched from the basement doorway with Thomas's empty vest on her shoulders and no husband in her arms. Outside, as officers placed him into the cruiser, one voice broke the silence. That sound, more than anything, made the crowd exhale. At 9:26, the county coroner arrived with 2 investigators and a state police unit. By 9:43, the basement was sealed. By 10:02, the scheduled transfer truck waiting 3 miles outside town was intercepted before it reached Crestwood. Inside that truck, investigators found empty transport containers, prepaid cremation tags, and a second ledger with names marked for batch processing. The coroner would not let Ellie identify him in the basement. Not there. Not under fluorescent lights, not beside shelves of other people's stolen goodbyes. Instead, he spoke to her in the chapel, where the flowers were fake and the silence no longer felt sacred. "Mrs. Mercer," he said gently, "we have located your husband. We will confirm identity properly. I will personally oversee his transfer to the county crematory. No charges, no delay. No one from Crestwood will touch him again." After everything, those 3 words almost undid her, because they were the first words from any official that sounded human. By noon, Crestwood Memorial was taped off. By 1, state investigators were inside the Mill Road storage unit. By 3, Marcus Bell had filed emergency action to preserve records and start a civil case for every victim they could identify. By 4, the story was on every local station. She sat in the passenger seat of Thomas's blue pickup outside the county crematory, with Ryder in the driver's seat and Rosa in the back. At 5:38 p.m., the coroner came out carrying a plain brushed steel urn. This one came with signed chain of custody papers. This one came with the garage key in a sealed envelope, released separately as personal property. Ryder caught her before she hit the ground. Ellie clutched the urn to her chest and finally made the sound she had been holding back since yesterday afternoon. Ryder held Ellie steady until she could stand. Then he looked past the crematory gates. Down the road, headlights were appearing again. Ellie looked at the first line of motorcycles rolling slowly toward her, then at the sealed envelope with Thomas's garage key inside. Old, yellowed, hidden in the property bag. On the outside, in Thomas Mercer's handwriting, were 4 words. Ryder saw the words and looked away too quickly. Ryder kept his eyes on the road beyond the crematory gates, where headlights multiplied in the evening light. Ryder opened the driver's door but did not get in. "We can take you home," he said, "or the church, or wherever you need." The old president of the Iron Saints looked tired, not weak, tired in the way only men who carried old guilt too long could look. "Mine said not to open it until after you opened yours. Even dead, arranging people like stubborn furniture." Ellie looked toward the road. The riders had formed behind her pickup now, 2 long lines stretching past the crematory entrance, engines idling low. The sound was not thunder anymore, it was a heartbeat. The ride to Route 17 took 28 minutes. Ellie sat in the passenger seat with the urn in her lap. He drove like Thomas had driven, carefully, one hand high on the wheel, eyes always checking the mirrors. Ellie stepped out with the urn, her knees held. Reverend Cole stood near the bridge rail, Bible in hand, but Ellie shook her head gently. The Reverend closed the book without offense. Ellie took the envelope from her coat pocket. Her fingers struggled with the flap, so Rosa reached out. Rosa opened it carefully and handed it back. Thomas's handwriting leaned crookedly across the paper, uneven from the tremor in his hand. Some words dipped, some climbed. A few had been scratched out and rewritten. Ellie touched the first line as if it were his face.
If you're reading this, then I did the one thing I promised I wouldn't do. I left you with a mess. Ryder stood several feet away, hands folded in front of him, staring at the river. I know you. You're trying to be brave in that quiet way that fools everybody except me. You're probably saying you don't need help. You're probably making coffee for people who came to comfort you. Stop that. Let them help. Those writers are not charity. They are proof. You and I spent half our life feeding men who didn't know how to say they were hungry. We gave them coffee, tools, a couch in the office, and sometimes just a place where nobody asked them to explain the worst thing they ever did. Do not let pride steal from them the chance to give something back. The writers were still. Even those too far to hear seemed to understand the weight of the moment. If Crestwood or any other polished place tries to make my goodbye fancy, fight them. I don't need velvet. I don't need flowers that cost more than groceries. Put part of me at the bridge. Keep part of me wherever you keep the bills, because that's where I spent most of my life anyway. A laugh broke out from Ellie before she could stop it. It cracked through tears, and several riders smiled because, even in death, old Tom had found a way to sound annoyed about invoices. Ryder has carried something that was never his to carry alone. That night at the garage, 22 years ago, when the lift failed and my hand got crushed, he has always believed it happened because he came in drunk, angry, and stupid. He thinks I got hurt saving him from himself. But I need you to tell him the part he never let me say. I chose to put my hand there. I chose to pull him back. I chose a living man over a clean hand, and I would choose it again. My hand shook after that, but Ryder lived. Ellie's eyes blurred so badly she had to stop. Ryder turned away from the group, shoulders rigid. Caleb, near the back, wiped both eyes with his sleeve. Ellie forced herself to read the final lines. Tell Ryder I finally forgave him, though the fool should know there was nothing to forgive. And tell him if he lets you ride home alone, I will haunt his carburetor until the end of time. Then Ryder made a sound that did not belong to any president, any biker, any feared man in any clubhouse. It belonged to a boy forgiven too late to argue. I came in drunk. I was throwing tools. The lift shifted. He shoved me back and... A shocked ripple moved through the riders. Rosa covered her mouth. Diesel looked like he might laugh and cry at the same time. Do not insult my husband's last words by refusing them. Ellie stepped closer and placed Thomas's letter against his chest. He forgave you. Now do the harder part. Ellie took a small portion of Thomas's ashes and released them over the river. Only then did Marcus step beside her and quietly say, "The state has frozen Crestwood's license. Preston won't reopen those doors. The Mill Road unit is secured. We're going to find every family." She looked at the 400 riders, the families, the police lights at the far end of the road. Ryder standing with Thomas's letter pressed in one fist. When she climbed back into the pickup, Ryder started toward his bike. Ellie gave him a look Thomas would have recognized instantly. Ryder sighed, opened the driver's door, and got in. Behind them, 400 engines started one by one, filling the dusk with a sound so deep the bridge seemed to tremble. Then Ellie looked down at Thomas's vest, still loose around her shoulders. Something inside the inner pocket pressed against her ribs. She reached in and pulled out a folded scrap of shop paper, stained with oil, hidden so deep she must have missed it before. He unfolded it at the red light outside town. If she ever says she's alone, start the engines.
Behind them, 400 headlights followed her home.